Welcome to Writer Syndrome, podcast about writing from start to finish. This episode's topic, we're getting into prologues. I'm Russ Capasso, and joining me as always is Tim Letney.
Oh, we're singing now.
Yeah,
Look at that.
I don't know why I did that. It just came to me, and I'm sticking to it. Hi, Tim. How are you?
Hey, Russ. Good morning.
How you doing?
Great.
I don't have a curveball question for you, so...
No? I got a fear. I'll give you a fear.
Give me a fear.
I've heard that people skip prologues. We have an entire episode about prologues. Are people going to skip this episode?
I think... That's why I sang in the beginning, because ooh, that's interesting.
Well, you better title it something different, like Russ Sings.
Russ Sings. Are people just going to skip this? Yeah, prologues. Skippable. Sometimes they shouldn't be, though, right?
No, they shouldn't be.
And they shouldn't be skipped because they should be important. But if they're not important, then they can be skipped.
Yeah.
That's for the writers out there. So, yeah, this came about because an article I read on selfpublishingschool.com. Yeah, I think getting into prologues, before we get into prologues, though, there's like a lot of different ways to open a book. And I feel like there's other, what they call
you take one hand and you
flip
move
the page.
Flip the page, or you scroll with your thumb.
Oh, my God.
I hear you.
Yeah. You're a dad. That was a dad joke.
Yeah, I got a lot of dad jokes, man. All right.
Well, there's like other devices, right, that are known to open books. So maybe we want to separate those out first and kind of define them, right? There's a preface, forewords, introductions, prologues. We're going to focus on prologues, but the quick rundown of the other three might be good, right? So
yeah, I think so.
So like a preface, that's mostly the POV of the author, right? It's not going to be of a character or the narrator. Pretty much explains the origins, development, legacy, or kind of aims of the book.
Yeah.
And it's mostly used in nonfiction. That's a preface.
So I've come across prefaces a lot in like books that have done very well and gotten like a 10th anniversary re-release or something. And so if it's the first time I'm reading that book, I never read it because I don't want it to be spoiled. But if it's something that I've read before or I'm curious about the process, like obviously there was one with like Stephen King and Pet Sematary or something that I read not too long ago, I'll dive in. But for the most part, they're filled with spoilers.
Yeah. Yeah. The same, and that follows up with like a foreword too, because that's like that's usually written by not the author. It's written by like a critic or subject matter expert or some public figure that is not the author. It kind of intros readers to the book, connecting its contents, themes to their own experiences, which that I see a lot of, and those I skip. I'm like, I don't want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I usually start them, and then I'm like, you're just telling me the whole it's just like this kind of bland academic paper about a book you're about to read.
Yeah. It's like, why would you do this? Like, put this somewhere else. Stop this. And then lastly, there's the introduction, which is typically the point of view of the author, providing more context or additional information to help the reader understand the book, right? Mostly used in nonfiction. I don't think I've ever seen an introduction in a fiction book before, but that might be a little bit weird.
Yeah, I don't know if I have either.
More context about the book, additional information. That's like, just write the book. So those are the three kind of intros to a book you might see, but we're going to focus on a prologue. So I guess we might as well get into really quickly, what is a prologue?
Yeah, because we both have prologues, right?
Yeah, let's define it first, and let's get into that, because we do, and I'm curious to see, this is where the discussion will happen. So prologue is kind of like a short story, right, without an ending, in a way, just to kind of get the reader into your story. You don't want it to be an info dump, right? And it's kind of a glimpse into the world. You can use it to set tone and mood, but it shouldn't just be for that. And it's written the same style as the rest of the book. You can use different devices, I think, in a prologue typically, right? You can do a flash forward of where characters are, something that took place like years ago, previously, thousands of years ago, but it's got to be something that's important to your story. It could be a foreshadow of things to come. So it could be all these things kind of mashed together, but it gives the reader kind of, without being an info dump, a way into the story. That's kind of what
the ones that kind of coming to mind to me, the ones that I've read recently that I didn't love. There's one at the beginning of Ghost Story. It's a flash forward, and it's very, very similar to the one at the beginning of Salem's Lot, which is also a flash forward.
Yep.
And I like the question of like, how do we get here in a way? But it also feels oddly limiting to me. Like, I know where we're going. I know this character makes it.
Yep.
Now, for me, it ruins a little bit of the rising tension throughout. But have you read any recently that stick out in your mind?
I have not, actually. In the last handful of books I've read, I've not read any prologues, so nothing that jumps out to me. And I'm trying to think of
The Exorcist has got kind of a neat one, and I don't know if you remember the movie, but
Yeah.
it's when Father Marin, the priest, is like digging in the Near East. There's like
Yeah.
an archaeological dig, and he like excavates a little figure of Pazuzu, which is the demon, and
Yep.
but it's written in this kind of beautiful, foreboding way. Like even though he's so far away from the story that's going to take place in Virginia and the family of Reagan and Chris, there is this kind of dread that's being built. Like it's like there's a lot of ambiance and a lot of discussion about like evil rising and humanity falling.
Yeah, yeah.
And it sets the tone. Even you never go back there. You never really learn too much about that character other than this when he pops up at the front door, 300 pages later.
Yeah.
But I think it was quite effective for setting this moment of dread.
It kind of sets some themes in there, it seems like, too. Maybe.
Yeah, definitely. This kind of like good versus evil theme,
Yeah. Yeah. So now coming back to your original question before we went into definitions, we both kind of use prologues in our books. How did yours come about?
You.
I kind of led that one. No.
So I never planned, right, to have a prologue. I wasn't like, I'm going to have a prologue. What happened is that, well, it was two things kind of happening at the same time. I have my very first chapter that's not the prologue is like first time writer 101. A character's waking up, which is like in retrospect, a super big faux pas. Like you don't start at the beginning of the day. You do this kind of come late, leave early thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Subsequent edits, I've continued to keep it because I still feel like that's my story. So
That's fine.
I finessed it, but it's part of my story. But I'll say that for the most part, it doesn't grab the reader's attention. I think it does a good job of character building, but there's no hint about any kind of supernatural or, creature featurey type things happening. It's really just kind of the beginning of a day in the life. And it will take you 50 to 60 pages before you get to any kind of monster.
Yeah.
So that's one part. The other part was I had this kind of hanging chapter that I had already written, and it was pretty long with a bee character that takes place at this processing plant where there is some things happening, where there is some creatures and there's some dread and there's some rising tension. But I never had an arc for that character. I just kind of had that one chapter to kind of set the stage of what was happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And it was kind of floating there. And yeah, that character comes back along and he's quite important in the third act, but it's not like he's one of the mains. He's just one of the side characters.
Right.
And it was your suggestion when I was like, what the heck do I do with this chapter? I quite like it. It definitely meets genre expectations. It feels so like fictional and I don't know. I like that chapter. So you're like, well, what if you edited it into a prologue? And I was like, how could I possibly do that? It's between it might have been a chapter or two, but it was like 6,000 words or something. You know me, I just can't stop writing. And prologues presumably should be
Brief.
Brief.
Yeah.
They don't have to be brief, but I was scared of having a big aimless chapter in the beginning.
Yeah.
So instead I cut it down to about 900 to 1,000 words, used it to set the time period.
Yep.
To make sure people knew they were in the 70s with talking about the Bubble Boy and, Jimmy Carter posters flapping in the wind and stuff like that. And then also kind of introducing this rising dread. This is where the infection, the creature stuff starts to happen. And this is how it begins to spread. And in retrospect, I quite love the prologue.
Yeah.
I don't love that I've since read that agents groan when they see them.
That was gonna be.
I like it.
Yeah, I mean, that was gonna be something I was gonna bring up later. But yeah, I mean, you tick on kind of the three big things to make a prologue stand out, and that's one is the time, your time difference potentially. Well, you were setting the time of the book, setting the tone and where we are, kind of the POV. But it's also not a scene that's a continuation of the story. It's not like chapter one was going to be a continuation of that. It also left you with a little bit of dread and a little bit of an open mystery box question. And it's a point of view you don't hop back into at all later on in the book, which I think are kind of some of the key things to making a prologue stand out separate from the rest of the story. So it's a prologue.
And the feedback that I got from people at the end of the prologue was that they were excited to continue reading because of what I set up. Because there's not a huge reveal, but there is, an inference that things are amiss, an infection is spreading, what's going to happen next. And to me, that made the subsequent chapter, the one about Judy, or my main, interesting because it's kind of happening on the same day. She's completely unbeknownst to her that like there's this bullet, from a different part of the state that's slow moving towards her life.
Yeah. Yep.
So no matter what, her life will change, even though she's kind of locked in her little teen angst moment.
Yeah.
But like that, even though it's not quite the catalyst, it's what brings upon the catalyst, 50, 60 pages later.
Yeah. Yeah, I like this. I like that kind of like setting up that sense of dread or something that's happening, like you said, something that's happening way over here that's going to somehow, it sets you up for being like, well, how's this going to impact my main character? As a reader, how's this going to impact this person and what point are they going to run into each other and how's that going to look? And I think that's kind of fun. I enjoy that personally as a reader. So
yeah, I think one of my concerns is that the prologue happens so long. As you're kind of getting through the story and you get, 200, 250 pages in, you meet that character again. And I'm just curious if the reader's even going to remember, like hopefully the prologue was poignant enough that that character stuck. Yeah. Because they are a character, they feel like they walked out of like, I don't know, Fargo or a Cormac McCarthy book or something. They're like, they almost don't belong in the book in a way because they're such a character.
Yeah.
Caricature, maybe.
Yeah, that's probably more what you're looking for. I've seen this as well at a lot of different places. A lot of people are like, prologues just shouldn't be a thing. Just get into your book. Just make a chapter 1 and just go.
I think it depends. I feel like if I had started with the idea of just writing a prologue, I'll say personally from what little experience I have so far in writing a novel, is that I'm not planning a prologue for my next novel.
Yeah.
I didn't plan one for my first, but it seemed to require it based on what I had written.
Yeah.
Like I did have a problem hooking the reader early. I did have content that I had already written that I thought was crucial to the story that kind of increased dread and added texture to it.
Yep.
And I was posed with the question, do I turn this into a prologue or do I cut it entirely?
Yeah.
And I felt that the book would be weaker if I cut everything and that I could make it stronger if I honed it. So maybe I'd say maybe don't plan, maybe sit down and write. And, I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm sure some people like to start with a prologue. My brain doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
I'll tell you that I don't think I will ever write a prologue that takes place at the end of the arc. To me, that's not appealing. Well, what about you? I've been gabbing on forever about mine that you made me write.
So you can tell I'm a big prologue guy. I love
You're
prologues.
a big prologue guy. You're like, you need a prologue. You need a prologue.
Look underneath your chair. There's a prologue.
There's a prologue there.
I don't know. I enjoy them. I think they can be fun. I think they're fun ways to like set the little mystery box question of the book type of thing. My book did not originally have it. I don't call it out as being a prologue. It's just chapter 1 and I go into it, but it definitely is a prologue. Mine's definitely a flash forward to where characters are at a certain point in time.
Didn't I suggest that you have a prologue too? This might be a big first-time writer faux pas here.
Did you?
I don't remember.
I don't remember.
Maybe you were
either.
planning it. Maybe we just chatted about it when you were thinking about it.
I think we might have been chatting about
idea.
it. Yeah, that feels familiar. Yeah, and I enjoy that like setup of like, ooh, how'd they get here? Who are these people? It's kind of what it is. And I guess I don't know. Is that bad? Is that good? Should I have just started? I mean, I start the book there, but I mean, I do like a 2 weeks behind. Next chapter 2 is like, all right, 2 weeks before that, and then I kind of build everything up to that point.
You use a prologue in a very similar way, right? Where like you're introducing the larger problem.
Yeah.
Before introducing your character.
Yep. Yeah, 100%. So it's like, I get my 3 primary characters. You get this mysterious woman that's there. You got Lilo. You got location. You got a sense of dread. You've got kind of kicking things off. It feels like very much like coming from our love of movies, I feel like.
Sure.
But yeah, and it's brief, and I really like it. I like the opening. I think it works, and I don't think I can't imagine, I mean, I'm sure I could come up with some other way to have started the book, but this felt right, and it felt like just a way to hook the reader and get them going, and then step it back and like, how do all these characters meet, and why, and what is this thing? That was fun for me. Second book definitely has a prologue, and this is like,
really?
There's no doubt it is. It's definitely going to be from a POV from a different character who you never hop back into for the rest of the book. Takes place back in time.
Oh, wow.
But it's really important, I think. And I think it's does multiple things. It sets the tone, does all that. It's basically a little short story without an ending. It definitely has the mystery box question, and it provides some information that's going to be important to the story when you get to like midway through Act 2, end of Act 2. So, and it's going to be like, oh yeah, okay. I wonder if that's a little something that's going to come back later. Yeah, that I'm excited for, and I like it, and I think I enjoy it. And then when I get to the first chapter after the prologue, it's not really going to slow down. It's going to be, I feel like hosts the chapter 2 where I introduce Elliot and kind of get into his world and his discovery. Things kind of slow down and like I'm slow building the mystery. Whereas in the next book, it's just going to be kind of like we're getting right into it.
Well, when you introduce Elliot, is it chapter 1 or is it chapter 2?
It's chapter 2.
Oh, so is your
My prologue is chapter 1.
Yeah. Oh, but it's not called a prologue.
No, it's not.
Oh, so it's not a prologue.
Is that how that works? You have to call it a prologue
I
for it
think
to be
you
prologue?
have to call it that. For real.
Yeah, I mean, it could be. It could definitely just be called prologue and then chapter 1.
Interesting.
I'm trying to remember if I had
So
this
you actually don't have a prologue. You just have a setup chapter.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean,
So nobody's going to skip your first chapter.
it's true. That's called the art of trickery. That's called
I mean,
trickery.
I'll tell you, as I was reading,
No one's going to see
And
and
who
see
knows?
prologue and be like, oh, prologue, skip it. And be like, oh, chapter 1.
yeah, maybe just do it twice. But it was surprising. I don't know how true it is. It feels like it's true, or at least it's an online sentiment, that there are writers and readers and agents and publishers that just don't like prologues and will skip them. Will like just straight up be like, which is like horrifying to me.
Yeah, I don't get it. I think they feel like it's not like, I wonder
It's
if
like they sit down and watch a movie and they fast forward the first 5 minutes.
yeah. It feels like maybe they think that because, well, like what's writing a good plot? Like what's important? What are the important pieces for having it? And why shouldn't you do it right? And I think a lot of times people probably fall in this bucket of like it just being an info dump or some garbage chapter that like pays off or doesn't pay off at all later on, and it has no meaning. So that's probably why a lot of people just skip it because they're like, "What is this? Like this isn't."
Yeah, this is just extra gobbledygook that you couldn't part with, so you stuck it in a prologue, and I don't need to read it.
Right. And it's like, and it comes back to like, why shouldn't you have a prologue, right? If it's just a purely info dump, which I think happens a lot, don't have it. Like, get rid of that or spread that info across throughout the regular story. And if it's like just for world building or just setting a tone or mood, get rid of it. Your first chapter.
Isn't it horrible though? We talk about first impressions and expectations.
Yeah.
And the fact that you run the risk of kind of isolating part of your audience just by having a prologue, like that trust, that reader-writer relationship trust is already a little like shook.
That's why I label mine chapter 1. Gotcha.
I had concerns about labeling mine chapter 1. I was like, this never comes back around. I mean, it comes back around, but it felt like if that character was chapter 1, then that character should be the main character to me.
Yeah.
And now you used your characters. I had like a B or C tier character that was kind of teeing up the world. So
mine's like, I guess by definition, technically not. I don't know. Like now I'm thinking about it because like I write from Elliot's perspective. He's my main character. It's just it just happens at a different point in time in the book. So maybe I did have that conversation with my editor, and I'm thinking back, and she was like, "No, this is just chapter 1 because." But the second book, I definitely will have a prologue. There's no doubt, to the point where I probably have to call it a prologue. And I don't mind that because it's important. And if you don't read it, you're going to lose a huge chunk of information for later on in the book. It's like, it's a bit, like, not to spoil it, but it's like a big setup for something that's going to be important like later on, that if you skip it, you're going to be like, what?
So that's interesting. Like, would you recommend, knowing that there are people who will skip it,
just label it chapter 1.
Well, it was either label it chapter 1 or should your book be able to work without it? Should it just add flavor and tone and setup? But if if that part of the book got ripped out, should your book still work without a prologue?
If you can rip the prologue out and your book works, then yeah, you don't need it, right? Like it shouldn't just be there if the story doesn't make sense without it. It needs to be part of the story. It still needs to be some important piece of crucial information that happens in the story, right?
Maybe we should rename ours Read Me.
Read Me. Introduction.
Even then, I think people kind of feel like they're like a little impatient and they want to get to it. And I'm sure they would flip right past an introduction too.
Yeah. But it's funny just because of the titling of it, like just because it's called a prologue, people feel like it's something that's outside of the scope of what's necessary of the book. But it absolutely needs to. if you're writing one, it absolutely has to be like crucial information. It can be something that happened way outside of the timeline and the story, but it's still got to be something that tees up the inciting incident or has some major like kick or point to the one of the characters, probably your main character, right? In their arc. Like if it doesn't, then you don't need it and get rid of it.
I think mine can work without it. And honestly, I think that if mine, in fact, I know, if like in my dream of dreams, if this ever got adapted into like a series or a movie or a short film or whatever, then my prologue would be cut, I think.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't think so, though. Because I
think the character would stick and like some moments of it could be potentially intercut.
Yeah.
But as it stands, it's the least marketable just because it's kind of critical of like the corporate dairy farming industry. And they are powerful. Nobody likes to say bad things about them.
And they do, just, meat. So, all right, so we got into like a lot of what is the prologue. We got into our own experience. We got into do you need one, stuff not to do in there. I was digging through like this masterclass and a bunch of other ones and found some tips of like how to write like a good one. And I think we kind of touched on a lot of this stuff already, right?
What's it say? Make me feel good.
Keep it brief. Number one, keep it brief. That is Tim is not in your. That is not in your.
No, but I edited it brief.
Okay. So
it was very long, and then I cut it down, and I took away all the judgmenty, garbagey stuff that I do.
Just get to the good stuff. Get to the blob stuff, right? So keep it brief, no longer than like a regular chapter. My chapter's already pretty short, but I think my chapter 1 prologue for host, it's chapter 1 really, is like a page. It's like a page and a half. Should be like a single event. No character development really. Only include like the crucial information in there. Something that's really important to, what's going to happen later on or that foreshadowing moment or something. Which my chapter 1 does that. Definitely in book 2. Crucial information. Definitely brief. Definitely single event. Definitely no character development. Just people getting killed that are important later on. That's all. I know it's kind of stupid, but it's like keeping it interesting, and it should be a 1-2 punch with the first chapter. It shouldn't be something that supplements your boring first chapter. Which I also kind of, fell victim to, and why I probably.
But you're okay because you didn't call yours a prologue.
I didn't call mine a prologue. It's just chapter 1. So get into it.
You dialed yours up as a chapter 1.
Yeah, I was like, it's not quite a prologue, but it kind of is. I'm just gonna call it chapter 1 But yeah, it shouldn't just be something that's there to. Yeah, it should be like a 1-2 punch. Like it should be prologue, and then chapter 1 should be like, yeah, we're getting into the story now. What other things I find across here? Make an event, not an info dump, and making sure it has a purpose, right? Make sure it has an intention to be there. And I think most importantly is making sure it ends with, like we said, like entering like that mystery box moment or like that question that hooks the reader and kind of pulls them in, which I do in my chapter 1. I mean, that ends with couple questions like, who is this hacker person here that they just met? What is this signal? Why is stuff happening? And again, it's kind of like a short story without that ending, that climax, tight. So I don't know. Those are some of the things I found, which I think I checked off a lot of those boxes for both my quote unquote prologues I'm writing.
Yeah. I think I did for the most part. I paused on the shouldn't supplement the boring first chapter, but I don't think my first chapter is boring, but I do think that there was perhaps some fear that I didn't get to the catalyst, even though it happens relatively quickly. But because there's like character setup, there's character development, there's a day in the life. That's part of the beats. It has to happen. So I can't say it's boring. It's just going through the beats and introducing you to these characters. But I did want this dread going on that yes, this is a day in the life, but also there's something else that's happening. I also, interestingly, my prologue not only kind of comes back around later a little bit, it's integrally related to one of my B characters who comes from the same area, it works at that place. It's not, my Guy Bowman character, it's my Walter character, but the location comes back again, just at a different time.
Right, and I think that's why it works, and I don't think your first chapter is boring. I think that's that juxtaposition of like you said before, what is this thing that's going on in location B that's way over here? That's going to impact this normal day for this young girl who is, angsty against the world type of thing. Like how are these two things going to collide, and what's that going to do? I think those combined make for like a great like little mystery box. Like how is this going to like affect this person?
What's interesting and a little painful is that as I've gone through some of like the query process and sent out, a handful of queries more than, they often want the first 10 to 20 pages, usually 10.
Yeah.
Very rarely it's like a couple chapters of the whole manuscript. So I was stuck with this question. Do I include the first 10 to 20 of Judy's arc? Do I include the prologue and then the first 5 pages of Judy? And I opted to not include the prologue because
interesting.
It didn't feel representative of the rest of the book, if only because that character isn't a main character.
Yeah.
And then I was like, well, shoot, like I'm losing that intrigue. I'm losing that setup. So then I just for the queries, not for my actual book, I rewrote the first chapter to like punch forward in time a little bit to the outbreak scenario to hopefully get like, it's weird. I'm writing for like an audience that wouldn't read my book anyway. But I'm like, don't worry, things happen. And I think there's this kind of, on the agent querying side, I had a fear that it was taking too long to get going. And since I lost the setup for the prologue, I had to almost recreate it, or not recreate it, but recreate what it was doing, that there is some action, there is something that's going to happen in the next 30 pages, but you won't see it because you're only going to read 10 to 20.
So if you have that fear, though, that prologue and that opening chapter not working for a query, then that's, I don't want to say this. Because you're going to end up rewriting your entire book, but you shouldn't be changing the prologue in the first chapter just per query, because then you're changing the book. You're changing what you've written.
I think that's what I've landed on. So now as I'm going through this like subsequent 8th edit, because I'm submitting, like I want to submit to like whatever, there's like a blacklist contest or whatever. I'm not doing that. I'm using my prologue. I'm using my regular first chapter. I'm tidying, but I'm not kind of restructuring. Yeah. It was kind of like A/B testing, like in the world of marketing. It was like, well, I tried it this way. Yeah. Now let's try it this way. And it turns out no way matters.
That's why you just got to stick with the way that works for you and be like, this is the story. Yeah. This is the way I want to structure and tell this story.
And I think that's what I've landed on, is that I'm still actually a little conflicted about whether I send along the prologue or not, especially if there is a inherent dislike for them amongst people who I guess like to read, but not like to read prologues.
Just do what I did. Just call it chapter 1.
But then it's not a prologue. I take issue with that.
Okay. Yeah, so you feel like you have to actually label it a prologue for it to be prologue?
I think that's literally the name of it.
Yeah, because mine...
Much like an epilogue, which maybe we'll talk about sometime in the future, I don't think that should be your chapter 28. I think it's it's an epilogue.
No, definitely. I know, I agree. And because like now I'm thinking about mine, it's like mine's a chapter 1. I could have probably just labeled it like a prologue, but it doesn't make sense because then it just rolls right into like the same character the next chapter. So although this setup feels like, because it's out of time, out of place, feels like a prologue. Definitely has prologue vibes.
But the nice thing about your chapter 1 is that it deals with your main characters.
Yeah, and that's the only difference. It was from someone else's perspective. I did it from like the power grid switch guy, which I had written a chapter like that, but that was like from the perspective of some guy who works at the power grid as it's getting locked out and yada yada yada. If I'd done that, that's definitely I could have labeled it. I should have labeled it as a prologue. And
okay.
Yeah, actually a lot of people have commented that they think my first chapter is a prologue.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So it has that vibe, but whatever.
They're like, I would have skipped this had I known.
If it was
tricked me.
If it was titled prologue, I would have skipped it.
Hey. He tricked me. I read a whole prologue.
Yeah, a whole 250 words. Good for you.
All 250 words.
275 words. Having gone through this experience of your kind of back and forth to the prologue, my experience, I love prologues. I'm okay with them. I think they're good. As long as they, again, go through and provide what they're supposed to do and are just like excess garbage because you didn't want to lose a chapter. I know you said you don't think of intentionally writing a prologue, but do you think you'll purposely avoid them?
No, I mean... It's just because my brain doesn't work that way. I'd never say don't plan it. Obviously, you should be planning your whole book. But I'll say I personally don't write with them in mind.
Yeah.
And then if the story, after whatever first draft comes out feels like it's going to need it, or there's some kind of hanging chapter that doesn't fit anywhere that could, actually add to it. I mean, that's what happened to me last time. And with Unhoused, I'm not. There are things I could use as a prologue.
Yeah.
But
if you
instead, I
don't-
think I'm just going to kind of use it as like, flashback's the wrong word, but kind of storytelling inside of the story itself.
Yeah. So you weave it into the rest of the story versus it just being its own separate event that's like.
But it's
starts
also
the
like,
book.
I feel like for Critical Mass, I was trying to, it's for a first novel, I personally feel like it was ambitious, maybe too ambitious.
Yeah.
There were so many locations and there were so many POVs and there was such a big story to tell. Unhoused is very much a smaller story with fewer POVs.
Yeah.
Maybe not fewer locations, but it doesn't feel like the story requires it. If anything, it feels like it'd be the type of story that would either have a really deep flashback, setup, or one of those kind of flash forwards. This is where the characters, or one of the characters, is it at the end, because it feels like that. But those don't interest me at all. Nor do they make me want to continue reading when I read those ones.
I think about writing the chapter I wrote that is now going to be the prologue for my second book. And I don't remember what got me into writing this, but I wrote it and I really liked it. I just enjoyed the scene, the event, the chapter. And originally when I was outlining the second book, I had this character as being a little bit more involved and like I was going to have scenes with them. But then I shifted all that and I was like, I don't need that. And I want to focus on Lilo and this other character. Kind of back and forth, the hitman going after her and yada yada. But I love this opening chapter so much that I was like, I like it and I want it and I want it at the beginning. Looking now how the story is unfolding, I'm like, actually, this is a perfect fit as a prologue.
Mm-hmm.
Like this is crucial information. Now we'll see what my editor says when I bring it to her. But it might be one of those ones where I'm just going to be stubborn and stick my feet in the dirt, sand in this one, and be like, no, I'm keeping it in there because I really love it, and I think it's just it's going to be such a nice little payoff at the end. And I'm excited about it, so I'm like, I don't care. I'll label this prologue for everybody so you know what it is. If you skip it, well, you screwed up. Yeah, you screwed up if you skip it, type of thing. And I want people to feel that if they do. So. Yeah, I'm writing with it with intentionality of it being there, and I think once I wrote the chapter, I liked it too much, and it just made too much sense that it's gonna be there.
But
so
chronologically, right? This is something that you didn't necessarily plan, but just in like creative space,
I just
came
wrote
up
it.
with the scene. Yeah,
and I just wrote it. And I wrote the scene,
but after you had written other things, right, or planned other things at least.
Actually, I just wrote it. It was kind of part of like the lore of a character. I'm not gonna say who.
Did you do it before or after you had planned the beats out and the scene breakdown?
I had written it before all of that.
Wow, really?
Yeah, because it was like kind of like a little backstory type of thing that I was just playing around with, and I was trying to figure out where to start a story, and I just wrote it, and I was like, oh, cool. This works out pretty well. And then once I outlined all the beats, I kind of had it floating there. I was like, you know what? Let me put this in there because I think this is going to be, as the story took shape, it started making sense.
Yeah.
And I was like, the characters and how they're changing and their arcs and the twists and everything else. I was like, let me just drop this right in the front. It's going to do so much. And it takes place 20 years before the events of the book. So it kind of checks all those boxes of different POV, but it's crucial information and it's going to make sense at the end. So,
Yep.
so yeah, I'm sticking with it. Gosh
Nice.
darn it. I like it. So
Yeah, I'm going to stick with mine too. Although I don't know it's weird. When I think about how I concoct stories, obviously I'll sit down and I'll have the beats and I have my scene breakdown.
Yeah.
But my brain doesn't stop working on it. It's like, a half-filled puzzle where like I'll be in the shower and I'll have an idea. I'll be near bed, I'll have an idea. I'll be picking the kids up from school, I'll have an idea. But none of those are chronological ideas. They're just scenes that I'm filling things in.
pop in. Yeah.
And I guess I can't say I'm definitely not going to have one for Unhoused, but I have not had the idea that makes the story stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and if we don't, if
It would just be checking a box.
Yeah, if it doesn't make sense, then don't do it.
Yeah.
So no reason to force it either, because it's just to have it.
Because nobody likes them.
Because nobody likes them. So. I warn you right now, though, if you don't read mine, you are missing out, reader.
Maybe like when you get to like, chapter 26 and it's relevant information, you could write a little like, if you haven't read the prologue, go back and read
now.
the prologue.
A little footnote at the bottom of the.
Yeah, a little asterisk to a footnote at the bottom.
Yeah, go back now and read.
You could choose your own adventure, but just one choice. Go back, read the prologue.
To skip the prologue, you've ruined everything. Yeah, so I don't know. Anything else you want to talk about for prologues? Anything?
No, I mean, I guess just make sure it's intentional and make sure we keep hearing, right? Like, make sure it's not an info dump and it's not, it's not it should be something the reader can't part with. It shouldn't be something you can't part with.
Right.
So, I mean, try to think about it from that empathetic perspective.
Good way to put it.
Just because you love it, I'm going through it right now. I'm cutting, again, a lot of my book because I've gotten so much distance from it. I can see what's needed and what's not.
Yeah.
It's much clearer for me to see what's needed and what's not. If the reader needs it, great. If you like it,
Get
maybe
it out of
consider
there.
cutting it.
Go on, get it out of there. So,
Yeah.
all right. What are you reading? What are you watching? Anything?
Let's see. I'm still kind of plucking through Legion, which is the sequel to The Exorcist.
Okay.
It's okay. It's not grabbing me
Yeah.
as much as the first one did. And then let's see. I finished up The Road,
Nice.
which was great, and I've listened to it on my runs. It made my long runs. I'm running like many miles, and I was like, this isn't as bad as being a character in The Road. it made running feel not as bad. I'm like, I've got food and water with me. These people starving.
That was.
There's cannibals. There's no cannibals. I just have bad New Jersey drivers I have to be careful of.
Yeah, they're just as bad.
They're terrible. And finished that up, and then I started No Country, which is just so good.
Yeah, I read that. Yeah,
I got to tell you, like, even though I'm trying to not read comps in this moment because of the new book, and No Country's not a comp, but going through so much McCarthy lately has helped again with this additional editing process. Not that I'm editing out like internal monologue, because he really rarely uses any. I don't think he uses any.
Yeah.
But it really is just kind of a need to know. It's sparse is the wrong word, but it's very intentional. So it's just helped me cut a lot of flab from my book. Like I've cut 2,000 words just by going through from, through my act one.
Yeah.
And nobody would miss anything. If anything, it makes it a little stronger just because
leaner.
It's leaner and it feels more confident.
Yeah.
It feels less like I'm trying to convince you of a thing and more like you're in good hands. I hope from a storyteller. And that's what Cormac McCarthy feels like to me. It feels like somebody is telling me a story. They're great books for audiobooks because it covers that.
I could imagine. Point.
But anyway, those are the things I've been going through lately.
Nice.
And then we finished the Menendez brothers. I know. Monsters, the Menendez brothers on Netflix.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm always like, I don't know if I've said this before to you, but I like horror.
Yeah.
And I in the 80s.
Is it like a fictional thing, or is it like a documentary type of thing?
I'd say that it's a fictional thing. Okay. I'd say it's like kind of like creative nonfiction, and where like there's a lot of truth and there's a lot of kind of, I don't know,
loosely based on a true story.
Yeah, loosely based, like fictional perspective, POV changing things.
Is that from their POV though?
So there's some from theirs, there's some from the parents, there's some from the lawyers.
Okay. Yeah.
And so getting back to what I was saying, I like horror, but I don't like the romanticization or like romanticizing actual killers. I never liked that stuff, like the Ted Bundys and the Menendez or whatever else. If you're in a Hot Topic and there's like an actual killer on a T-shirt or a movie about it, to me it feels exploitive and it just grossed me out. I've always stayed away from that stuff. Although, I own all the Friday the 13th and the Halloweens, which oddly enough, they're only exist because of, real life people like the Night Stalker or Ed Gein or whatever else. So I think I've always had maybe a morbid fascination, but have always been like, these people don't deserve to be in the media. They shouldn't be praised.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be turned into icons. Like, learn from it, diagnose it, learn how to avoid it, I guess, but don't get a poster up in your room, don't print posters of them. But there's like this, people love. So that's all to say, going into the Menendez, I was like, I don't want to watch this. Like, I hate this type of thing.
Yeah.
But it's done by the guy, I think Murphy, who had done American Horror Story.
Okay.
So it's done with like a flair and like a lightness that it's actually enjoyable. Like I sat down with Jill to watch it and it's macabre and it's terrible. And it still is kind of like, you can see how people would come out of this, like liking the Menendez brothers or hating them even more or whatever else. But I enjoyed it. So because of that, now that I'm going down this horrible turn, we just fired up the Dahmer one.
So now you're on a kick
because I was like, God, like it was acted so well. The writing was so good. Yeah. The directing and cinematography was so good. And the Dahmer one is from the same people.
Same camp, yeah.
So I was like, I'll try it. And see, like, it feels like their hearts are kind of, I mean, yes, it's content and it's for money, and
Sure.
but it
Sure.
feels like their hearts are kind of in the right place. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. 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 Bad
Anyway.
people doing bad things all
Bad
around.
people doing bad things.
Period.
We can't look away. I'd like to be better than I am and be able to look away from the terrible things. But I think we as humans are curious, and we're all kind of rubberneckers.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Rubberneckers, and we have morbid fascinations about stuff. So that's it for me, I think, with watching and reading.
So that's it for me.
That's it. I'm a terrible person.
Cool.
How about you?
Let's see. I can't remember where I left off. I finished the Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson. I can't remember if I mentioned that the last episode or not, so I'll mention it again. I finished that one.
Yeah, you may.
And I finished that description setting book that was kind of one of my writing craft books of the year. I finished The 0 Day by David Baldacci.
Okay.
The one that has the title that I wanted to use for my third book. And I think I remember mentioning that I'd started reading it, and it's basically like a Jack Reacher style book, silhouetted guy on the cover of the book thing. It's, it's fine. It fits squarely in like that thriller genre for dad, Totally fine book. Checks all the boxes. Definitely get to a point where like, oh, here's a point where the author did all his research. Now I'm learning about plutonium and nuclear weapons and got it. And it becomes like a research paper, which
Oh, really?
is fine. And this happens in a lot of these genre, and that is fine. This is expectations of the genre, and people love that stuff. I don't. And I was like, this is just dragging the story down. We don't need all this. Like, get this out of here. Like, pages and chapters of like discussing nuclear weapon storage and all this sort of stuff. I'm like, okay, this is fascinating, but like this went from being a novel action adventure to now like an info dump of nuclear weapons.
Is the main character learning about this stuff?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, from another character. So it's a lot of questions, which is like, oh, how does this work? I was like, oh, dude, come on. Like, there's got to be another way to like convey this and get this through. So it kind of slowed things down.
Interesting.
But the end, it was fine. It's fine. But what drives me nuts, though, is the fact that it's called 0 Day, and it's not related to 0 Day exploits or what I wanted to use my the title of my
Can you
book
explain
for.
what are 0 Day exploits? It's just like computery stuff?
Yeah, it's like, so it's a critical flaw in a software or system that is already exposed and already out and already being like exploited. So they call it 0 Day flaw or 0 Day exploit. So there's no patches for it. So it's just out there and people know it and they're taking advantage of it already. And you'll see them all the time, like Microsoft's and all the big companies, they have them. And then as time goes on, they patch them as they can, get to them.
And this book has nothing to do with that?
Zero to do with 0 Day exploits.
0 Day.
0 Day. So I think 0 Day was, maybe there's a nuclear, maybe 0 days, and like I've never, like if you Google search 0 Day right now, you're gonna get mostly the software version exploits.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe there's like a nuclear explosion bombs going off type association with 0 Day. Maybe. This book is not related to computers or hacking or software or exploits at all. So
that's interesting.
So yeah, so I think it was just more of like a cool title he came across, and that was it. So, which is frustrating because my title was me perfectly tied into so much of like my stories and my books and this book now that I'm writing too.
It's making me think of, there's a Nine Inch Nails album that was released in 2007 called Day Zero.
Yeah.
Which is more about like an apocalyptic scenario.
Which that's what I was thinking that might be, like 0 Day as in like apocalyptic nuclear bomb going off in the United States. Like you have zero, I don't know, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think he was going to end up doing an HBO show, Trent. Never did.
Yeah.
But 0 Day was written in 2011. I wonder if there was a copyright thing.
Might have been. Yeah.
I mean, it's just weird that he would use something that's so associated with computers.
And even back then, it was still associated with computers. Like it's been for,
Yeah.
Again, I'm going to throw this out there. If you're titling your book, don't just go for a cool title. Go for something that's actually connected to the goddamn story.
Especially if it's going to ruin one of Russ's titles
later
on.
Yes, don't take my title that I've
Come on,
crafted.
David Baldacci.
Yeah. Anyways, so I finished that, and I just started The Darknet Inside the Digital Underworld by Jamie Bartlett. It's nonfiction. Ooh. It's kind of about, the dark web, darknet. The darknet. Yeah, Batman shows up. I'm just getting into, the darker side of the internet. So More to come on that one. And watching-wise, I watched The Fly recently, actually the other night.
Cronenberg's?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
What a I hadn't seen it in so long, and man, that movie is pretty great. It's so ridiculous, but I haven't seen it in so long, and rewatching movies like that back in the 80s, and you're like, first of all, it just goes. It's an hour and a half. It's an hour and 30 minutes or an hour and 20 something after like credits and everything. And like the way it opens is just like so like, oh, okay, we're just Gina Davis and
Jeff Goldblum.
Thank you. Jeff Goldblum, like they're immediately just like, okay, we're off and running. And then like 2 scenes later, they're like, they're in love. I'm like, when did that all happen? Whatever. Like funny stuff like what happened. I was like, has he been wearing the same clothes? And then like 2 seconds later, she's like, you wear the same clothes? I'm like, what's happening? Really good though, and all the special effects. It's so like I love like the body horror stuff.
I haven't seen it in years, but it was formative when I was a kid.
Oh, it's so good in the ending too. Like when he pulls the gun up to his own head as he's like the fly climbing out, and she's like crying, like and it's so funny. She's like crying over like shooting someone that she loves, but he's a total monster. And when she does it though, his head they do the old cut to him, and like his head just absolutely explodes. It's like all right, it's a bit rough, but yeah. So watch that. It was pretty great. And then I watched Aliens last night.
Oh, great!
Yeah,
so good.
I watched the, I guess apparently I have the special edition version, which looks absolutely beautiful still. But it's
This
funny.
isn't the one that they kind of like upscaled with AI to 4K it?
I don't know. I don't think so.
There was a big hubbub online about like James Cameron's ruining his old movies with AI. I don't remember.
Oh, I don't know. I got this like a while ago. I mean, it's digital.
Probably not done.
I don't think it is. I bought this a while ago, just on a digital format. But it's it looks beautiful. What a great movie. What a great sequel. But it's the special edition one, so it's like got an extra 17 or 18 minutes of footage, which I've seen before, but I forgot. And I got to moments, and I was like, wait a second, I don't remember all this stuff. And I was like, I can see why they cut all this because you don't even need it. It's when they go to Hadley's Hope and like they show Newt's family getting killed. Or not getting killed, but the face hugger.
Oh man, I faintly remember seeing that. It wasn't in the version that I just watched.
It's totally unnecessary. When you go through, you're like, wow, you definitely don't need this. This like this just cuts all the tension out of like what happened at this base
And it's not a director's cut. It's just kind of like, here are some extra scenes, so you go back to the theater and watch it again, type of thing.
You don't necessarily. I don't think you need director's cuts and all this extra shit.
That's what they did with The Exorcist as well.
Yeah, you don't need it. Like this was like totally pointless. It was just kind of like throwing you off too. It's like, wait, what? The timeline here is kind of weird. And there was some extra like Paul Reiser and like political corporate bullshit scene that wasn't necessary.
Man, that scene, dude, when Paul Reiser locks her and Newt in with the face hugger. That's like masterful filmmaking. It's like so tense.
When
it's like so good.
I kind of forgot about it actually, and I mean I watched the
standout scene.
Yeah,
so
and she
horrifying.
like when she reaches her head up to the bed and can't find the gun, and then she looks out and that's in the other side of the room. You're like, oh no.
Yeah, so tense.
But yeah, great movie. Both those are great movies, so highly recommend. If you haven't seen The Fly or Aliens from 1980, 1986 and 80, whatever they came out in. But yeah, that's pretty much it for me. So
Nice, man.
all right. That's it. That's our episode. Thanks for listening. Join us next episode where we're going to talk about the end of the book, the epilogue, right?
Don't skip it, though.
Don't skip it. You have an epilogue in yours, don't you?
I do.
Yeah.
It's like a first-time writer's checkbox.
We did it
It's
all.
like prologue, check. Waking up, check. Epilogue, check.
Dream sequence, check. No, I'm just kidding.
I do. I got a ton of dream sequences.
Oh, you screwed up. No.
I love my dream sequences, man.
Keep it. So that's what we're going to talk about next episode. If you enjoyed this one, share with a friend, follow us wherever you listen to podcasts, and give us a review, please, because that helps. And you can also find us on Instagram at Writer Syndrome Books, where we do no updates, but someday we will. And,
yeah, we'll do them someday.
But for all of our episodes and contact information, you can visit us at writersyndrome.com.